Do you ever wonder how successful entrepreneurs built their businesses from scratch? Are you unsure if starting a business is for you? Well, tune in as we discuss how successful entrepreneurs transformed their ideas into reality. Welcome back to From Zero to Revenue with your host, Chris Yap.
Welcome back. You're listening to the podcast show From Zero to Revenue, the show that features a journey of successful entrepreneurs from around the world. I'm your host, Chris Yap. Today, we are going to discuss what personal entrepreneurship philosophy is and its importance as a business owner. I'd like to thank our sponsor, GabTech Global, your outsourcing company for LinkedIn marketing and various back office services. You can learn more about their services at gabtechglobal.com. I am truly honored to introduce our guest today, a serial entrepreneur, a venture investor, a renowned speaker and author, a contributor at Forbes, a professor at USC, Mr. Sid Mohasseb. Welcome to the show, sir.
I am delighted to be with you and honored to be with your listeners.
That's amazing. Again, today, this is another testament of how powerful LinkedIn is. I reached out to you via LinkedIn, and now I've got you in my show, and I'm really excited here. So, Sid, you've got a lot of stuff going on, obviously. You've got a wealth of experience as an entrepreneur. You're an educator. Tell us a little bit about your professional background. What's keeping you busy these days?
Well, I do really three things these days, and they kind of have a connection to my past because I have built a number of companies. Right. I have sold a number of companies. I have failed in a couple. I've been consultants to very large organizations, and I've been investors to early stage companies. So I've almost sat in every seat in an organization: the investor, the board member, and I've been at big corporate as well. So what I do now is I think is a combination of things that I like, and they're connected. One is, as you mentioned, I'm a professor at USC, University of Southern California. I teach both in Marshall Business School. I teach data-driven strategy or dynamic strategy. And I teach also in the engineering school, in the School of Industrial Engineering. So that's about 30% of my time, or it was before COVID, because now it's a lot more given the changes in the in the way we teach.
Yeah.
So that's about a third of my time. I also am, as you mentioned, a writer. I have one book that was on the bestseller list for Amazon for best strategy book or business book called The Caterpillar's Edge. And I do a lot of writing, and I'm writing a new book, which we can talk about as we get into the show, about this whole idea of the entrepreneurship philosophy. And amongst that, I also do a lot of speaking engagements, as you mentioned. So I do a lot of speaking engagements for CEO forums. I do it for large conferences as keynotes. The third piece of my life is an advisory and investment role. So I make investments in early stage companies, usually kind of a man and a laptop situation a little bit further, or I advise CEOs and so forth on growth, on how to evolve, how to change, how to explore the frontiers given all the stuff that's happening around us. So that's what I'm doing now.
That's amazing. That's very interesting. Obviously, you embrace pretty much everything about entrepreneurship. That's why I'm excited to talk about your book. But before I get into that, I know you moved or migrated to the US when you're 16 without your family. Tell us a little bit about that background and what was that like for you?
Well, I have to tell you that I also have hemophilia, which is a blood disease.
Yeah.
It's a genetic blood disease. So when I came to the States, I was 16 years old, and my parents were adamantly against it. But for some reason, call it borderline of stupidity and genius. This was a few years before the revolution. I come from Iran. This was a few years before the revolution in Iran, where I had decided and I pushed, and there's a whole story around how I got here in terms of the conversations that I had with my parents. But anyways, when I got here, basically I went to school. Very quickly after that, I was not getting any funding from Iran anymore, from my parents. So we had to do essentially anything because of the revolution and all that sort of stuff. Anything possible. I remember I had 2 master's degrees and I was getting $1.50 in salary.
Wow.
And I wanted to make sure that I looked good, so I would go to the corner store and pay $1.50 for a cup of coffee. So I would work for an hour to make sure that I've got I can afford $1.50. Or my first company that I started with a couple of friends, I was still in college, and I remember that I went to New York to meet some folks. We introduced the first what we called the facsimile service. This was I'm dating myself, that yes. was when fax machine just came and people couldn't afford to have 2 fax machines, one on each side, and people didn't have it. So we created a service called Fairfax International, and I remember we wanted people to help us essentially deliver these things at locations. So I'd go to New York with $50 in my pocket, and had to manage how do I deal with these partners and so forth. So it was an interesting ride, but it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about being resilient, about stick-to-itness, also about flexibility. That things don't happen the way we always plan. Although we should plan, but to plan is more important than the plan itself.
That's right. So obviously, you definitely have that entrepreneur blood in you. I mean, from a really young age, kind of similar to my story. I started my first enterprise when I was 15. I was selling sausages like door to door, and that was back in the Philippines. That was, one of my first gigs then. But Sid, coming into the US at that age, what was your vision? And how does that compare to your reality today?
As most people would realize, you're coming to, first of all, when I came originally, my intent wasn't to stay here. Again, it was a great place to be. There was lots of opportunities. My thought was that I was going back, but that very quickly changed as the situation in Iran changed.
Right.
So, it's obvious that everybody knows this is the land of opportunity. So the question was, where are the opportunities?
True.
And how do I unfold them? Perhaps I wasn't aware enough or knowledgeable enough. I went to USC as well for both my undergrad and graduate degrees. But maybe I wasn't aware that I should have a lot of internships or I should do a lot of other things in life. I was just pretty naive about all those sort of stuff. So in that context, I had to rely on my own, if you would, entrepreneurship or street smart in a way to maneuver through things. I didn't have anybody to introduce me to anybody to get a job or, I remember when I graduated, there was a massive unemployment going on. That we had, I sent somewhere around 300 resumes or something, and I didn't get a job. So that kind of facing reality was something that was critical. But I think the main thing that I learned very quickly was that there is one thing that I have, and it's not money. It's the ability to gain trust and deliver on that trust. If others trusted me, trusted my judgment, trusted my intellect, trusted my ability to deliver, trusted that my word is good, then I have the ability to build things. I have such an asset that goes far beyond the capital that at that point I didn't have any. So that was a very early stage learning that trust is important. Trust is earned. and it is not just, and you have to walk the talk to be able to turn it into something tangible. The first job that I got was in a consulting firm. I was the sixth employee. And a few years later, 4 or 5 years later, I was their youngest partner. We built that company and we grew it by about 300 people, 200 and change people in a span of that time. So it was a massively successful. And I learned a lot in that area about the hard work. Now, not hard work doesn't always pay off. So the fact is that if you work 20 hours a day, that doesn't necessarily mean you are 20 times better than the guy who works 1 hour a day. But in that period, I became a partner because I worked about 3,100 hours a year. Now, normal, as you know, is about 20,000, 2,100, 2,080. So I almost worked 6 months extra, 18 months in a 12-month period. Right. And that was the way that I was able to gain the confidence and the trust and all of that as well. So hard work was important. Gaining trust was important. And then the ability to be flexible to meet the opportunities where they needed to be met.
That's just an amazing story. Obviously, a lot of those I did not know. I mean, some of those are probably couldn't be found online. That's why, I feel so privileged sitting here with you right now, learning a little bit about you. But I think for our audience, this is the kind of story that I like, presenting in my episodes, in my show. It's just so inspiring. Like, here you are, a teenager from abroad, from Iran, and didn't know anyone. It was really through hard work and trust. And by the way, that segment you mentioned there on having the trust capital versus the financial capital, I think a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs are missing that today. And I obviously you would agree with me on that, and I'm seeing it every day. It's like they have this idea, they want to make it big, but they're not walking the talk.
Yeah. So Chris, you're absolutely right. So there's a few things in what you said that's hidden, if we can unpackage those. One, people look at the Henry Fords or Elon Musk of the world and say, oh, if they're entrepreneurs, then I'm not. Mm-hmm. Well, that's just nonsense. The definition of entrepreneurship, going back to 1700, is that you have a resource, mm-hmm. you aim to exchange that resource with something better, mm-hmm. by taking a risk. That's an entrepreneur. You mm-hmm. have something, you want something better, you're willing to take that risk to get that to something better.
Love it.
Okay? Now, that I say pursuit of happiness. That's what we do every day.
Yes, sir.
At our home, at work, with our family. If we are a homemaker, we go buy groceries, we spend money. That's a resource we're spending. We spend effort to turn that resource into something that our children will enjoy. So we are exchanging one resource with another, which is happiness. Mm-hmm. That's an exchange. So we do this at work every day, regardless of where you work. We're exchanging one thing for another. Now, let's assume every student that goes to school works hard, spends a lot of money, sleepless nights to do homework or study for tests and so forth, in anticipation that all of that hard work, all of that investment, one day would make them a better life.
Right.
It would make more money for them. It would position them. So they're exchanging all of the resources now mm-hmm. for something that they think would be better. And they're taking a risk. There's no guarantee. So in that context, we're all entrepreneurs. We're all in pursuit of happiness. The question is, how do we apply that entrepreneurship talent? I say, how do we color it? Mm-hmm. We color it with our own origins and originality. Now, if you take all entrepreneurs that we see everywhere, these days, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and those guys are everywhere. Obviously nobody can question their success, but so is the guy who has a store, a restaurateur, somebody who has a mechanic shop, somebody who is. We're all entrepreneurs in a way. We're taking some resource that we have and we're changing it, and none of us are exactly the same. We're very different.
Sure,
all of us are different. So. When I don't know, let's look at Jobs. Steve Jobs says, that he's about customers don't know what they want. We're delivering. Bill Gates says the opposite. Customers know what they want. We have to deliver. That's completely opposite. Well, these guys are they've made it. So if you look at Warren Buffett, his definition of risk is very different than Elon Musk. The way he operates is different than Jeff Bezos, and all of those are different from going back in time to Ted Turners of the world or Rockefellers of the world. They're all different. So the key is, it is our originality that matters, not our origins.
Wow.
Our origins are presenting some things that are undisputably, they are constraints, but they don't necessarily guarantee our entrepreneurship success. They don't guarantee our leadership. They don't guarantee anything. Yes, somebody, because their father has a lot of money, they may put me in a position, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be a successful entrepreneur or a good leader.
That's true.
The question is, how do we turn our originality and have that lead what I call our personal entrepreneurship philosophy? Now, philosophy means literally love of wisdom. Love of wisdom. So when I say personal entrepreneurship philosophy, is the love of our own wisdom and of our own talent. If we work at it, we learn more, we apply more. It's not that all of those guys, we can't be them, but we can learn from them, but we can't be them.
That is true. And so, Sid, I know you gave me, by the way, man, just listening to this, I could listen to you all day without falling asleep. I've probably filled up 2 pages of my notebook here already. So you mentioned this. This is basically a segue to this book that you're writing about, the personal entrepreneurship philosophy. And we were doing our pre-show discussion. You mentioned briefly, like, I think there were 3 or 4 buckets of the different philosophies. Give us a little overview of that book and what's your mindset in writing that book.
My first book was around this idea of not leaving change to chance.
Okay.
It's about the fact that we have to evolve always. And in that context, it was more of a book that set the stage about the need for us to evolve. This book is maybe some would say it's a follow-on. I don't think it's a follow-on. It's maybe a companion in a way. Is more about this idea of entrepreneurship. That book applied to a lot of big company CEOs and so forth. But what I found was that in order for me to be able to evolve, there's a few things needed. One is I have to have a purpose. I have to have a place to evolve to. That is, why am I doing that? How do I do that? And what are the important things to do? So I believe, and let me talk about the tenets. One is that I believe that we are all the sculptor, the artist of our own sculpture, our masterpiece, which is us. And this is a perpetually changing sculpture. That is, it's very different than we do it once, we put it on the shelf and then we admire it. That doesn't work because everything in the world around us is changing. So if we are the best. We have the best perspective that we have. This has to change because everything else around it has to change. As you notice, some people call me the entrepreneur philosopher because I have a lot of tendencies of introducing ideas. So, for example, Plato says we have to distinguish between that which always evolves, which is always becoming, and that which is never becoming and always is. That is, the world is always becoming, is always changing. So in order for us to succeed in it, we have to be able to change with it. Now, how do we change is our original approach. So this is where our philosophy comes to play. So I'm not against how-tos, but I'm not for how-to books because the how-to books are mechanics of things. But the way you succeed starts with your mindset, not the mechanical things that you do. And I can motivate you to change. I can motivate you to come to the table. I can motivate you to go to the stadium, but I can't get you in the arena to fight or in the arena to play. That you have to do. And you have to be prepared for that within the context of where you come from, what your education is, what your capabilities are, how much money you have, what your ideas are, what your intellectual capabilities are, what region of the world you live in. Well, all of those are what makes you you. And nobody can tell you because they're not you. Because all they have to do is an estimate of you. So the tenet is that we're all the sculptor, the artist who's building our sculpture was always changing. We have to have some way of approaching this, and that I call our personal philosophy, entrepreneurial philosophy, which is to be able to explore a number of different areas and then pick from it. So before we do that, we have to accept that we're an entrepreneur. That we have the talent. Because if we don't accept that we have the talent, then we don't see the opportunities in any one of these buckets, in any one of the things that I'm going to talk about. First, if some of us are in denial. So people say, well, what do I do if I'm in denial? That I'm not an entrepreneur. Here's what it's a very, very simple ask from you. When you get in the morning, see what risk you take in exchange of something that you have for something better. Here's the thing. You're at work. You're risking not finishing that project. You're risking your boss saying, where the hell were you? You leave 15 minutes early to go to your son's soccer game or baseball game. You just exchange something for something of higher value in your mind, taking a risk. Everything that you do, you're an entrepreneur. You have an office space. You go buy $10 of $100 of something. You put those cookies up front because you think the customers are going to come. Oh, guess what? You spend a resource in order to exchange it for something else, and you took a risk. So the best way, if you're in denial, is to just observe yourself of how you are actually acting entrepreneurial in your everyday work. The minute you tell your kid, go to school and learn something new, guess what? You're an entrepreneur. Here's the definition. If you divide entrepreneur, some people say it means to go out, to swim out, and get knowledge. Guess what? All scientists are therefore an entrepreneur. They go out. If you tell your kid, go out and get some knowledge, that means you're telling them, go, spend your time, exchange it with learning, because that is an important exchange, right? So what are the tenets of how would that work? One tenet of all entrepreneurship activity is risk. The risk is at the core because you have one resource, you're exchanging it with another, and in the middle is risk. So I would say you have to decide what kind of a pilot you are. Imagine a pilot. A pilot, you have a commercial pilot who flies every day. They have a plan. They take a risk. It's a pretty big risk.
Sure.
Okay. But it is managed risk. They have charts and graphs. They have everything that, they go through this thing, and it's a managed risk. That's kind of like a corporate life.
Mm-hmm.
If you work at some place, you're taking a risk because you have to do certain things. That's a commercial pilot. Now, you have what I call weekend pilots. That may be an aspirational pilot. That's an aspirational entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
What do? They don't want to risk the whole life, but they're willing to take a little bit of life risk over the weekend, doing something, exchanging, or now they're calling it a side hustle. So you have a side hustle that you're trying to, you're not risking your entire resources for something better. You're just taking a little bit and you're exchanging it for something better because you're not comfortable yet. Now, that's where fear gets in the way. Those are, like we had people that are in denial. We said, how do they do it? Just observe how you're entrepreneurial every day. These people are aspirational. They want to be an entrepreneur, or they're contained. That means they work for a corporate life. And the way that the thing that stops them is fear.
That's true.
It's fear that, hey, if I exchange this, and it's confidence and fear that if I try to exchange what I have for something better, I may not get that something better. That's a practice and knowledge of how do I improve it. That's working on the formula of how do I improve it, right? So it's a different way of dealing with that risk. And then staying with the pilot analogy, you have the fighter pilots. Now, fighter pilots, a lot of times they're being shot at.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot riskier. So they have the same risks that a commercial pilot have, same risk that commercial pilots have, and the risks of competition and dogfights and bullets coming their way, if that makes sense. So it's a little more engaged, a little more riskier, but the essence of it is still being a pilot.
Right. And I guess
some people like Jobs, Steve Jobs, most that I call them the astronauts. They have a different aspiration.
Yeah, I was going to say that I wonder how we would categorize Elon Musk. He's probably an astronaut.
Yeah. So they have a different, bigger aspiration that's bigger than all of us. The risk is pretty high. The returns is almost significantly higher. So if we look at life in that fashion and we say, okay, where do I land on this thing? And if I want to be a practicing entrepreneur is able to navigate through risk. Say, entrepreneurs, unlike what people say, don't take risks. Those people are in Las Vegas. Entrepreneurs navigate through risk in order to accomplish that exchange that we talked about. They have something, they want something better. They know that this gap has to be somehow filled. They have to take some risk. They go through this navigate through this stuff to get to the other side. Right? Now, unfortunately, there's another group of entrepreneurs, the way they define it, and those are, I call them the snake oil salespeople. They are misguided.
Right.
They're not, they're well, build it and they will come kind of, hey, fake it until you make it, that kind of attitude. And They're not entrepreneurs, they're shysters.
Mm-hmm.
Entrepreneurs work on the value, work on this exchange, and they exchange something. So that's being a pilot, right? So the second area that you need to explore in order to build your own entrepreneurship philosophy is, I call it your oceanness. And I say be an ocean. Like be a pilot, be an ocean. What's the characteristics of an ocean? An ocean is a provider. That is, you in that ecosystem, the plants, the fishes, everything, there's a harmony of give and take. There's also a connectivity. That is, every piece is connecting to every other piece. If that ecosystem doesn't work, there's a problem. So Microsoft has 17 million people in their ocean. I may have 12. It's still an ocean. That means, how do I interact with my ecosystem How do I exchange value with my ecosystem? If I have a partner, if I have a vendor, if I have an employee, how do I give and take? How do I build my ecosystem, which makes me a provider to this ecosystem? And then I use an analogy of waves. There are different kind of waves in this ocean that's being built. There are some that are like a tsunami. That an iPhone is a tsunami. Not everybody has an iPhone. There are some waves that are running our business every day, and there's some waves that are tropical. They get us into it. So we have to have work on all of those. So in our oceanness is how do we spend our energy in making sure that there is movement in this. That's how we run our business, and making sure that we have an ecosystem that's connected together. There are two other things. One is the ability to, I'll say, be a dancer. I used to call it be a shifter, and some people say, oh, shifter is no good. It has a negative connotation. But be a dancer has this idea that nothing works as we plan. I used to be the president of one of the largest angel investment entities in US. I used to see like somewhere around 12 to 1,500 business plans every year. Guess what? None of those investments, none of those companies really succeeded based on the business plan that they originally developed. I have not seen one entity. You may be lucky, others may have had a different. I have seen thousands of business plans and entrepreneurs over the years, and I have not seen one that the exact first business plan really worked until the end. So being a dancer means execution requires you to do a lot of different things. It requires you to be a problem finder and not just a problem solver. In school, I ask people, I say, well, how many of you, the first question I ask in almost every class that I have is, tell me, how many of you are problem solvers? Guess what? Chris, are you a problem solver?
I am a problem solver.
Okay. Now, imagine how many schools there are. Imagine how many graduate students and undergraduate students. There's about 200 million people that graduate every year from colleges. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them thinks they're a problem solver. So we have an army of problem solvers.
Right.
You know who wins? You know who is the leader?
Problem finder.
Problem finders.
That's true.
Problem finders are the leaders, not problem solvers. Problem solvers, now, problem finders have to know how to solve the problems. They can't just go around and say, hey, I found one. That's idealist. Sure. Right. So, but those leaders, those who get to become a leader in their organizations or good entrepreneurs are the ones who can find problems. So that's part of being a dancer, being able to find problems and solve problems, being able to execute effectively, being able to manage this exchange, stay relevant to your constituents and customers. That staying relevant and timing is very critical when you talk about entrepreneurship. I may have the best solution, but if the timing isn't right, nobody would buy it.
You know, Sid, the realities that you described, I wouldn't say concept because they are realities. It's a major paradigm shifter, especially for me. Like there were several items there, or not again concept, but facts you mentioned that it just helps me understand myself. And I'm sure other entrepreneurs listening to the show right now can agree with me, because when you define, like you mentioned, being an ocean, when you put those analogies and being a pilot and being a dancer, it puts things into perspective that I feel like I knew that before, but now that it was placed in such clear description that I can identify myself with, I feel like I am empowered almost immediately to do better. Because like you mentioned, I do have an ocean, I have an ecosystem I have to maintain. I have, quite a few employees that I gotta maintain. And, now putting that perspective is like it made me realize there are some things that I could have done better. And just while you were talking.
So here's the thing that as I mentioned, some people call me the entrepreneur philosopher because I use a lot of analogies. I use it. Here's what I believe is the best way that I can provoke you. Mm-hmm. The best way that I can contribute to you is not on a piece of paper tell you 1, 2, 3 what to do. Yeah. Because I'm not you.
That's true.
Okay. Now that a lot of people can tell you how to manage your budget. What's the best way of doing marketing? What's the best way of, your keywords should be this way and SEO should be this way or whatever. This is the sales relationship plan. There's lots of how-tos in terms of mechanics of how to do it. But my feeling is that all of those would work different for every individual. So the main thing is if I can provoke you to tap into your ability of entrepreneurship talent and shape it like a sculpture, the way you would want to do it, the way feels comfortable, normal for you. So when I say oceanness, you can understand that as you have an ocean. You are a provider. You are a provider. So how do you provide? Now now the next step is, okay, am I really providing to my ocean? Who is in my ocean? And as you begin to think about it, now you can go to how-tos of how do I do something here or how do I do something there? That's the mechanics of it. But the first thing is that you have to be provoked to think, outside the box. And people say, it's not about thinking outside of the box. It's about understanding that your mind is drawing the box. There is no box.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
Why do you need to think outside of the box? There is no box. You draw this and then you're in the box and then you want to go and think outside of that box. There's no box.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So that's just such powerful paradigm shift that, you know what, I think other than you being called as a entrepreneurship philosopher, get this, I think we should start calling you the entrepreneur whisperer as well. It's crazy how just while you're talking with all the context of the analogies and how we can identify ourselves with these philosophies, so many things were popping in my head. Like it made me realize, like, these how-to books, I've read a few of those. Now I realize a lot of them didn't resonate with me. And I think you're right. It's because they don't even know me and I'm different from who they are. But, when I read philosophy books or philosophy related, that's going to prompt you to think and discover yourself better, I relate with those kind of books better. So I'm really excited to read your book. And I know we're getting close, and I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time, but I wanted to ask you this because in your TEDx talk you had, like I mentioned earlier, in 2011, you mentioned there that there is going to be a major shift. At that time, and I put a note here, you mentioned there that actions are taken, then reactions were measured. But you predicted that will change to reactions and desires will be measured first before actions. And this is kind of relative to your article on innovation and what you mentioned earlier about innovation. Do you think this is happening now? That has this prediction that you had? Is this happening?
Yeah, that was about 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing that. I think we are seeing that. That you see even in the social media world, things are happening and reactions and measures, and then actions are taken by people taking a position here or a position there.
Right.
So a lot of that is happening. That products is being developed based on an already defined needs that's expressed.
That's right.
As opposed to here's the product. Let me see how it. So that dynamics, the change of power is already happening. So what I think is happening in the next 10 or 20 years, which is the beginning of what I call a major shift. and that is that has been accelerated with the COVID situation. That is what was supposed to be done or was on a path to be done in 20, 30 years from now has jam-packed in 10 years or 15 years, has been jam-packed in about 2, 3, 4 months. Resistance lines about acceptance of technology has changed. Artificial intelligence has taken a much, much bigger role in our lives. You would see a lot of changes in employment. You would see a lot of things that are changing and a lot of stuff that are taxing our minds in terms of doing things that are mechanical are being replaced by machines, which means that we as human beings have to think about our next evolution. Our next evolution would be entirely different than what we have experienced to now. I mean, everybody says, oh, when are we going back to normal? I mean, there is no normal. That normal is gone. There is no new normal because we're in the age of abnormal now. We're constantly changing. The speed of change is so fast that by the time that you think you're in a normal, then you have entered another abnormal.
That is
in a few years, we are all sitting in autonomous cars. Okay, so what happens to the insurance industry? Who are they insuring? Me or the car or the Google? You have Elon Musk did this thing a few weeks ago around a pig that they're doing their neural system, and you can take action. And he says, you can think that you need to go somewhere, and then your car would respond. Your autonomously driven car would respond and show up in front of the door. I mean, that's pretty futuristic thinking. Maybe it doesn't happen in the next years, but it would happen in 20 years. So we're facing an entirely different universe. And what happens is that each one of us as individuals have to face this notion that we have to evolve. We have to get detached from the sameness of the past. This was the normal. I was happy with it. And I think, I think the root of that evolution resides in this idea of entrepreneurship, in this talent of exchanging one thing for another by taking a risk. It's by us taking a risk to accept AI and technology, by us taking a risk in learning more about topics, by us taking a risk in our business, in our life, in our education. And that exchange is what is going to get us to the next frontier.
So Sid, with that said, for those who are entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs, what problems should they be chasing? What problems should they be finding, given what you just said? And I'm asking you this as an entrepreneur and as an investor.
So let me first delineate this idea between innovation and improvement.
Okay.
If I'm improving a product, I'm improving. I'm not innovating. Now, a lot of people, big corporates have decided to paint this old R&D departments as innovation departments. Innovation means creating, in my book, in my definition, innovation is about finding new value, a value that was not there before. Right?
Okay.
A value. Airplane is an innovation. Wasn't there before. Having 2 seats versus 4 seats in a row on an airplane is not an innovation.
It's improvement.
Okay? It's an improvement. How much higher do we go? How much lower do we go? It's an improvement. But having it land by itself. So innovation is creating new value. Now, whenever, and I think that the world of entrepreneurship is faced with tremendously significant amount of new values that can be unleashed, particularly in whatever you connect to technology, because it's an unlimited thing to do. There's unlimited, every aspect of our life is now integrated. So in every aspect of our life, there are problems and new values to be discovered and solved. Every aspect that, from our education system to our restaurants, as we see, there's lots of challenges from there. to you take it. Every aspect of our life has a lot of areas where innovation can happen. Now, I can't tell you because you are different than me.
Of course.
You may see a problem and a solution to a problem entirely different than me. That's why there are so many great entrepreneurs that are being successful, because they see, every one of them sees the problem and approaches that discovery of that problem differently. Now, the advice is change your frame of reference to be able to see those problems. And by frame of reference, I mean your perspective. You look at a problem, don't look at it from the background that you have, dispute yourself, change the way that you look at things in order to see multiple dimensions of value that could be delivered. That would help you discover more problems.
Wow. Well, Sid, we are at the top of the hour. This has been such a pleasure having you here today.
Pleasure
Sid.
was mine. Pleasure was mine.
Just amazing. Sid, for those who want to connect with you, I have a feeling there's a lot of people who probably want to ask you questions or just kind of get your insights. And I also have a feeling that they'd want to get you to talk to their corporate events. How can they connect with you?
Sure. So I'm obviously on LinkedIn,
Yes, sir.
but the best way is my first name at my last name, which is sid@mohasseb.com. That's my email. Sid, S-I-D, at Mohasseb, M-O-H-A-S-S-E-B, which is my email address. .com. I'm sure it's on your show's list or whatever.
Yes.
But if they are also interested in my upcoming book, I'm going to do this very entrepreneurially. So as opposed to my last book was distributed by Simon & Schuster, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to have a limited number of them that would be published, and those would be the first exclusive, if you would, and I will sign every one of them and all that. So if they're interested in getting one of those, just let me know. And I will, when that's ready, it would be probably about a month and a half, I will get you the link of where you can get it and how you can get it. And then you can make a decision if you do want it or not at that
Absolutely.
point. But if they're interested in that exclusive first set, they can send me an email and just say, hey, add me to the list of when it's available.
I would definitely want to be in that list. And yes, when that link is available, I will do a shout out on that. So again, Sid, thank you so much for being with us today. And guys, this concludes our show. Again, this is Chris Yap, your host of From Zero to Revenue. This show was brought to you by Captech Global, your outsourcing company for LinkedIn marketing and various back office services. You can learn more about their services at captechglobal.com. As Stephen Covey said, all things are created twice. First in the mind, then in reality.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of From Zero to Revenue with your host, Chris Yap. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and review on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.